Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to decode the current state of the US-Iran conflict. We'll be zooming out from a completely choked-off waterway all the way to the shifting political pressures back in Washington. We're going to look at the data, the proposed deals, and the domestic realities shaping this huge geopolitical standoff. But most importantly, we're going to explore how a crisis unfolding thousands of miles away could actually impact your daily life, from the cost of your groceries to the price of fuel at the pump.
Okay, to really grasp the sheer scale of this situation, I want you to imagine your city's absolute busiest highway suddenly dropping from 140 cars a minute down to just 2. Literally, 2. That is exactly what's happening right now in one of the world's most critical transit lanes. Before the war, up to 140 ships passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. But on a recent Wednesday, that number plummeted to just 2. When we talk about global commerce slowing to a crawl and supply chains fracturing, this stunning drop is exactly what it looks like on the water.
Section 1. The choked strategic bottleneck, where global trade is at a standstill.
So, to understand why this sudden drop matters so much to you and the rest of the world, we really need to look at the physical bottlenecks itself. The Strait of Hormuz is essentially the jugular vein of the global energy market. It handles nearly a fifth, 20% of the world's global oil and LNG exports. This isn't just some random geographic feature. It is an absolutely critical, irreplaceable valve for our global economy. When traffic drops from 140 vessels to practically zero, it puts massive immediate pressure on energy markets. And that scarcity threatens to spike fuel costs worldwide, meaning everything from manufacturing to filling up your car gets significantly more expensive.
And you know the crazy part is, it's not even just Hormuz. Multiple maritime arteries are seizing up all at once. If you look further south at the Bab al-Mandab Strait, which is a vital gateway to the Red Sea, they recently saw just one single vessel pass through. This near-total shutdown is happening right as Yemen's Houthi forces formally declare a blockade against Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea. Now, normally, up to 12% of all global maritime trade goes through Bab al-Mandab. Right now, both of these dual arteries of international trade are practically frozen, and it's sending major shockwaves through the entire shipping industry.
Moving on to Section 2. The Oman-Iran Agreement, proposing a new path forward.
With these vital shipping lanes totally choked off, a potential solution is actually emerging, largely through mediation by Oman. The proposed framework is basically a logistical dance to get things moving again safely. First, they'd agree on brand new geographical coordinates for the shipping route. Then establish one single entry lane and one single exit lane. The really fascinating part is the split in authority. Iran would assume oversight of all inbound ships entering the Gulf, while Oman manages all the outbound traffic. It's an incredibly delicate sharing of power, designed purely to restart global commerce.
But there is a massive caveat here that complicates everything. Iran insists that any agreement will only lead to a reopening of the strait if the United States completely ends its naval blockade and eases its military pressure. So, while the logistical framework with Oman might look great on paper, the geopolitical reality is still deeply tangled. I mean, logistics alone just can't override a military standoff.
Which brings us to Section 3, the US-Iran disconnect, and their competing narratives on diplomacy.
Now, what's really wild about this slide is the total, almost surreal disconnect between Washington and Tehran. Let's look at the claims. On one side, President Trump says Washington is talking directly to Iran, publicly calling it their last chance to make a deal, and insisting a reopening is very close. But then you look at Iran's claims, and they are telling a completely different story. They absolutely deny any direct negotiations with the US, insisting this deal is strictly bilateral with Oman, and holding totally firm on requiring the removal of the US naval blockade. To understand why there's so much diplomatic friction and mistrust right now, we really have to look at how fast things fell apart recently. Let's look at the timeline. Back in June, a memorandum of understanding was signed. Article 5 literally granted safe passage free of charge for 60 days. Awesome, right? But shortly after, the US demanded that ships coordinate with its forces and take alternate paths. Well, when ships took those new paths, they were still attacked. By late June, the US launched retaliatory airstrikes. The cycle of violence flared right back up, and that MOU was completely dead in the water.
This leads us to Section 4. Expanding regional escalations, with new fronts emerging.
See, that failed June agreement actually demanded an end to the war on all fronts. But as we zoom out, the conflict is actively expanding. The violence is spilling over borders. In Lebanon, Israeli forces are heavily bombing southern villages after an IED in a booby-trapped building killed 2 soldiers and wounded 4. Over in the Gulf of Oman, reports from the UK say a tanker heard 2 nearby explosions.
And in the Red Sea, Houthis claim they've attacked 2 Saudi oil tankers, including one right off the critical export hub of Yanbu. In total, Houthis say they've targeted 9 ships since their blockade began. The whole region is basically a tinderbox right now.
Finally, Section 5. Political pressure in Washington and the domestic dynamics shaping the conflict.
Zooming all the way out, these sprawling regional escalations are creating massive shockwaves back home. Take a look at this fascinating split playing out regarding U.S. military readiness. According to multiple media leaks from a Camp David meeting, extreme munition shortages are threatening operations. Reports claim President Trump got into a heated argument with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth over the lack of info, with Hegseth reportedly blaming his deputy. But if you look at the other side, President Trump's public response, it's totally different. He posted on Truth Social that the U.S. has massive amounts of munitions, completely denied the argument ever happened, and blamed an unnamed leaker for feeding false info to the press.
Adding to these shifting dynamics in Washington is a major change in personnel. The passing of hawkish Senator Lindsey Graham removes a highly trusted, very pro-war voice from President Trump's inner circle. International relations experts note that Graham was a unique figure who could successfully pitch an aggressive military posture straight to the president. Without him there, the inner council is fundamentally altered, and some analysts actually think this could shift the balance of influence to make a diplomatic path a bit more likely.
And you know, this expanding conflict is really shifting voters' sentiment too. Check out this polling data. When voters were asked which party handles war and terrorism better back in 2024, Republicans had a solid lead, 39% to the Democrats' 28%. But look at the present numbers from just this past Monday. Democrats have actually nudged ahead to 37%, with Republicans dropping to 36%. Democrats marginally overtaking Republicans in public trust on war and terrorism is a massive turnaround, and for decision-makers in Washington, this is a serious strategic concern heading into the midterms.
Which leaves us with a final, incredibly complex question to consider as we wrap up this explainer. With the structural Oman deal potentially on the table, shifting personnel in the White House, and mounting domestic pressure at the ballot box, will the Strait of Hormuz finally reopen? Or are these fragile diplomatic efforts just a brief pause in a widening, uncontrollable regional war? It's a huge puzzle, and the next few moves will literally impact the entire globe. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning what you see.